Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Brandy, and everybody for sharing. So at the end of what I would like to say this morning, I'm going to offer a single query. How are you experiencing or nurturing abundant life in this season? How are you? How am I experiencing and or nurturing abundant life in this season? This notion of abundant life is one of those biblical phrases that I kind of find myself using often, but I sort of take for granted. And maybe that's the case for you too. So I want to give you some ways to think about this idea today and hopefully open up some possibilities so that you can ultimately come to some greater degree of clarity about what, well, three things: what it means to you to have life abundantly, whether or not you or others are experiencing abundant life, and also what could be done so that you or others could more experience this thing that Jesus goes as far as to basically say, this is why I am here. This is why I came. So when I think about the meaning of abundance, some synonyms that come to mind for me are plenty, fullness, a lot. And I think it can also mean having an overflowing amount of something, an excess, perhaps even enough to spare some. So this past week, to kind of deepen my understanding of abundance and to have a little fun, I asked some folks on social media last Tuesday, what is something that you have a lot of? Possibly, but not necessarily more than you need. What is something that you have a lot of, possibly, but not necessarily more than you need? So some of the responses included books, screens, fabric, bad puns, oregano, sarcasm, moss. I like this one. Attitude. Yarn, lots of yarn. A lot of people have a lot of yarn. Belly fat. Gratitude. Ants in my liquor. Sounds like an old folk song or something. I got ants in my liquor, trouble in my soul. Okay, ants in my liquor. Solitude. Also timely. Canned veggies. These are very topical, very on point to the moment. Sass. Somebody said they had a lot of sass. I think that was my wife, actually. Pine cones. Clouds. Kind friends. I like that one a lot. Magazines. And something that somebody had a lot of, toilet paper. I don't know if that's good or bad, if that means they're well stocked or they're hoarding. I'm not quite sure. So these are things people have a lot of. But what about having a lot of life or an abundance of life? What does it mean to have so much life that maybe you even have some to spare? So in John chapter 9, before the passage that I'm going to put up again that Jose read earlier, in John chapter 9, verses 1 to 12, Jesus heals a man born blind. One would think totally transforming his life, removing the limitations that came from being unable to see. And then in chapter 9, verses 13 to 34, the Pharisees question the man, trying to make sense out of how he could be healed and how Jesus, this man, could do such healing. To which the healed man basically just says, I don't know how I was healed. All I know is that I was healed, which is a true but imprecise answer that really kind of annoys the Pharisees. Then at the end of chapter 9, in verses 35 to 41, Jesus speaks of spiritual blindness and his goal of helping people who can't see, and helping people who think they see realize that in fact maybe they don't see. And in healing literal blindness and in exposing spiritual blindness in this pairing, Jesus demonstrates the broad scope of his ministry. And in so doing, I think prepares us to read today's passage with a recognition that Jesus came to liberate us from external things, external chains, as well as internal ones, both of which I think hold us back from abundance. So in chapter 10, verses 1-6, Jesus starts explaining this metaphor of the sheep, the shepherd, and how the two are related. Then, in verse 7, Jesus says, "Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep." Later in verse 11, Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd." And I think that might have a bit more obvious of a meaning to us, since we can maybe see Jesus as somebody that protects and cares and pays attention and makes sacrifices for others and so on. But I think the gate really emphasizes the protective part of this. I know when we encounter gate language in the Bible, it can sound very exclusive, like this is a passage about eternal salvation or individual judgment. But that's not the point here, I don't think. I think the gate, like the shepherd, is about protection, about reassurance. Verse 8, "All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them." Thieves and bandits try to lure the sheep away, but the sheep don't respond, which seems to suggest that the sheep are so attuned to the shepherd's voice, so familiar with that way that leads to life, that they resist the call of these thieves. "I am the gate," in verse 9. "Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture." I think it's best to not bring any theology to this verse that is derived from outside of this moment, if possible, particularly atonement theology. In other words, let's not assume that saved here has a single meaning that applies here like it does in every other instance, but instead ask, what does it mean to be saved in this illustration? Who is saved? What are they saved from? What are they saved for? Part of the answer to that may be in the phrase, "will come in and go out and find pasture," which makes me think that being saved has something to do with being safe, being looked after, being free to live life as it should be lived, coming and going, finding pasture, finding what you need, both materially, but also inwardly, spiritually, maybe even living without fear. I also think verse 10 gives us part of this answer. "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly." It seems like we are saved from the thief, which in the metaphor Jesus lays out as a single person, but in practical life, day-to-day experience, I think this thief is legion. It's many, it's anyone or anything that is seemingly bent on stealing life, killing life, destroying life. If I asked you, what is stealing your life? What is destroying your life? What is killing your life? I would imagine that some answers start to kind of arise for you. Jesus, on the other hand, is here to give life, to affirm life, to grow it, to create it. He came so we might have this life and have it abundantly. Which brings me back around to this question, what is life in abundance? What are the signs of abundant life? So I don't presume to have a definitive answer to that, nor do I think that's necessary. But I want to give you today 5 frameworks for reflecting on your own answer to that question. These 5 models or perspectives all get at this idea of abundant life, I think, but from very different angles. So I want to propose a Pauline perspective, a psychological perspective, a gospel perspective, a friend's perspective, and a moral spiritual perspective. So let's start here. This first perspective, we'll call it a Pauline perspective or maybe a fruity perspective. This comes from Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 to 23. And here in this chapter, Paul is encouraging his readers to live by the Spirit. And he lists several behaviors that he calls works of the flesh, which sound a lot like the kinds of things that one might say steal, kill, or destroy life. Things like jealousy, quarreling, alcoholism, or any other addictive behavior, before he then speaks to the signs of a spirit-filled life, or perhaps an abundant life. He says that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. I think this perspective invites us to ask queries like, am I regularly expressing self-giving love? Am I experiencing a deeper joy that sustains me through inevitable sorrow? Am I finding inward peace and helping grow outward peace in my world? Am I able to endure difficulty and long periods of waiting with patience? Am I extending kindness to others? Am I sharing myself, my time, my resources in a spirit of generosity? Am I being gentle with others and gentle with myself? Am I sticking with worthwhile goals and projects in a spirit of faithfulness? Am I practicing the balance and restraint of self-control? So perhaps the key to abundant life is here, in a life that displays the presence and guidance of God, shown through these 9 deliciously tasty fruits. The second perspective I want to share comes from the discipline of positive psychology, which plays a significant role in my dissertation and book, and actually has some parallels to some things Brandy was sharing earlier from the Buddhist tradition. Positive psychology, in short, is the science of human goodness. So research and therapy in this field tries to answer the question, what habits and practices help people not just cope, but flourish and thrive? There's a nice shorthand that captures the core concerns and areas of research in positive psychology, the acronym PERMA, which you can see there, P-E-R-M-A. This encapsulates 5 elements of human flourishing. So the more that these 5 elements are present, positive psychologists would say, the more people will experience happiness, a deep happiness that goes beyond any kind of momentary, fleeting experience, but is more steady and continual. Maybe what we would call, or what John would call, the abundant life. So the P is for positive emotions. This is about basically feeling good, feeling optimistic, feeling hopeful, feeling grateful, feeling awe at the world. E is for engagement. This is about finding those flow states, those moments when we get lost in doing something, often something we're good at, and almost lose track of time, and maybe everything else too. R is for positive relationships. This is about connection, experiencing supportive, healthy relationships, feeling a sense of belonging to a group, which gives us safety and strength. Having folks to whom we can give and receive from. M is for meaning. This is about being a part of something greater than yourself. It's about how you answer the why question and feeling a sense of purpose in your work and in your life. A is for achievement. This is about a feeling of personal success, the experience of setting good goals and attaining those goals. So I think this perspective is helpful and invites us to ask queries like, am I making choices that could help me feel more sustained joy and hope and gratitude? Am I engaged? Am I doing things I enjoy that give me life? Am I isolated or connected? Am I experiencing intimacy and belonging? Am I a part of something important and worthwhile that's bigger than my own life? Am I accomplishing my goals? What am I succeeding at, even if it's very simple, modest success? So maybe the key to abundant life is here, in a life marked by these 5 elements of PERMA. A third perspective comes from Matthew 25. So if the first 2 perspectives approach the question of abundant life from the angle of what's happening within me, I see in this gospel perspective or model more a question of how do I help bring abundant life to others? And in some cases, literal life, as in literally remaining alive rather than dying. It comes from that provocative moment when Jesus suggests that what will have most mattered in the end was how people treated him. And then he clarifies this very profound mystical and social truth that where he is wherever somebody is hungry, thirsty, without clothing, without welcome, sick, imprisoned. And as we think about the actions and patterns that constitute an abundant kind of life, I think we can keep in mind a fundamental truth from positive psychology, which is that it is deeply fulfilling to our brains, to our bodies, to our souls, to give and to care and to love. We're wired for it. So it may be here, perhaps as kind of an echo of the theme of blindness from John 9, that we experience life in abundance while living in a way that brings life in abundance to others. And maybe we can grow this abundance by feeding those who are hungry, ensuring that no one's life is depleted by lack of access to healthy, regular food. By giving drink to the thirsty, ensuring that clean, accessible water is a given. By welcoming the stranger, ensuring that those looking for a safe space to be, whether a spiritual community that will affirm their personhood or a country that will shelter them, that they find such a welcoming space. We can grow this abundance by maybe clothing the naked, maybe by donating clothes, or perhaps ensuring that those who have little are not exposed beyond just literal nakedness alone, but also in all of the other ways that the poorest among us have so little buffer, so little protection. Maybe by caring for the sick, both through the irreplaceable work of face-to-face care, being present, encouraging words, cups of tea with honey in them, but also through growing a better support system that enables everyone who is in need of care to get it when they need it. And by visiting the prisoner, not forgetting those literal prisoners, many of whom are in prison for unjust reasons, or at the very least are treated unjustly while there, but also by visiting those who are imprisoned in a more figurative sense, whatever that means to each of you right now. I think this perspective invites us to ask queries like, am I giving food? Am I giving drink? Am I giving refuge? Am I giving clothing? Am I giving care? Am I giving my presence? Maybe the key to abundant life is here in increasing the well-being of those Jesus calls the least of these. Of course, not because they are actually the least in God's eyes, but because that's how the world often seems to see them, helping bring them abundant life. A fourth perspective comes from our own tradition. We have our own set of essentials, patterns of activity that have emerged as friends have listened to their guide and acted upon leadings in ways that have brought life to others and to ourselves. I think that Quaker spirituality at its best is a dynamic interplay between turning inward and outward, between the contemplative and the active, between the personal and the social, between the mystical and the tangible. And our essentials are, of course, the spices, the ways that we give testimony to the presence and activity of God among us. So how might these spices reflect abundant life? Simplicity. Simplicity might help us discover that the things we thought would give us fullness of life were actually distractions and clutter, prompting us to find real abundance in having less and to lessen our own complicity in systems that steal life from others. Peace might help us expose how we are prone to steal, kill, and destroy through violence in many different forms, and guide us instead toward the kind of abundance that can come when otherwise warring factions come together to creatively and collaboratively solve problems. Integrity might expose the hollowness of life that is all talk and no action, all appearance and no substance, and help us experience that abundance of life that comes when we have coherence between what we say and what we do, when we're honest and clear but kind, when we're trusting and trustworthy, when we're grounded but open-minded. Community might remind us that despite the fears and the pride that often isolate us, we can open our gates, so to speak, and let in not thieves, but saviors, people in our lives who can carry us, rejoice with us, cry with us, laugh with us, challenge us, and grow us, thus leading us to a life that is more abundant. Equality might remind us that our voice, our unique experience of the divine and of life is worth hearing, and that such honoring of the divine within might increase our sense of abundance. And it could turn our gaze to others who are not being treated like their voices matter, so that we could participate in their elevating and liberating, increasing their abundance of life. Stewardship. Stewardship might remind us that part of what makes life abundant is the world that sustains us, that gives us an abundance of air and water and food and beauty and warmth and shelter and pleasure and so on. And that the more we can care for this planet that gives without ceasing, the more that we can turn from the ways that we steal and kill and destroy, the more that the abundance of the earth may increase our own sense of abundance. I think this testimony, along with the other 5, invites such queries like, how am I embracing simplicity? How am I growing peace? How am I living with integrity? How am I valuing community? How am I co-creating equality? How am I practicing stewardship? Maybe the key to abundant life is here, in celebrating the God who is in all things and all people, and treating all of them, ourselves included, as though this were true, as though we really believed it. A 5th And final perspective I want to share, which I'll call a moral spiritual perspective for now, comes from early 21st century author Matt Boswell, PhD, EMT, THC, vis-a-vis, TBD. What other things you want to tag on the end? You might know for me that the most important part of the formative part of Christ-centered spirituality, the essence of discipleship, is about learning how to love as Jesus loved. And essentially, in the perspective that I offer, an abundant life is a life of ever-increasing love, a life of you and me together journeying toward love, and along the way toward love, loving. And the way that I break down the nature of love in terms of thinking about where to start, how to practice, how to grow love is in terms of these 5 virtues of love. Many of you have heard much about. There's the virtue of gratitude, which helps us receive the love of others, the gifts of others, the beauty of others and of the earth. The virtue of self-care, which helps us care for the most precious gift we've been given, maybe, ourselves. The virtue of justice, which helps us take responsibility to care for others in the way that they need to be cared for, to set others free in the way that they need to be set free. There's the virtue of kindness, which is truly about loving excessively, going the extra mile for others, showering others with gifts, maybe like the prodigal father of the prodigal son. And there's the virtue of hope, in which the power and energy behind love is really realized. It's that capacity to see what could be in our world, in our others, in ourselves, and then do what needs to be done to make what could be actually be. These virtues invite queries like, how am I receiving the life that others do or can give me? How am I caring for the life I've been given? How am I caring for the life of others? How am I celebrating with wild extravagance the life of others? How am I helping the abundant life come to all, slowly but surely? So maybe the key to abundant life is here, in experiencing the love of God through loving our world, our friends, our family, and ourselves, just as Christ loved and loves. So now that I've asked like 500 queries today, I'm going to simplify things back into just one query. You can bring all of the other ones with you. And as you think about all of these possible approaches to the notion of abundant life, none of which are going to be on a test, I promise, as much as this probably felt like a classroom lecture, I encourage you to let what's not pressing among what I've said kind of just fade away or be saved for later. And what is most salient, what's most compelling, rise to the top. And as you think about all of this, I invite you to listen for what your guide is showing you in response to this query. And I'll write it again. I'll write it in the chat, but I'll say it again. And it's hopefully very simple. How am I experiencing or nurturing abundant life in this season? How am I experiencing or nurturing abundant life in this season?